here at Otter Tail County. And we may have some more folks hopping on, but we will go ahead and get started today. And we will be recording this session. So just so you know that, folks do ask us to rewatch it after, and if they weren't able to hop on live while we're presenting today. So just to make that known. Today we will be walking through really focused on the legislature and what came out of this year's session from a housing investment perspective. I will start though by giving a quick overview of the Big Build housing strategy, what we've been doing, hopefully likely familiar to most folks on this call if you're joining us. Then we do have a guest today, Scott McMahon from the Greater Minnesota Partnership, which our community development agency is a member of that organization, and I've had the privilege of serving on the board for that group as well. But Scott's with us today to give some updates again on the legislative side, and then myself and Barbara Dacey will be sharing from the county's perspective where we see the impacts and where some of these programs will fit into our housing strategy. And certainly we'll have time for Q&A and other discussion as we go through our time today. So the Big Build is the initiative that was kicked off back in 2020 with 4 primary areas of action. One, to certainly a focus on increasing the construction of new housing units that are really across the spectrum of need. Our data shows that we have a need for all types of housing, and from rental to ownership, senior housing, general occupancy, affordable market rate. It's all needed. So we really want to support that growth, and some of these programs and funding sources that we'll talk about today fit into different areas of that spectrum. The second area, which is really one of the reasons we're here today and working together on this, is we know this isn't something that's going to be solved on its own. We need to work to build partnerships and build capacity of our developers, our communities, really be thinking about our employers, what their needs are from a workforce perspective and the challenges that they're experiencing, and how can we all work together to come up with solutions that try to address that housing challenge we're experiencing. A third area is to seek funding opportunities. And so now we have a whole new plethora of opportunities that we'll be able to seek out to help solve our challenges around housing. And then finally, the fourth action area is to advocate for that increased funding, which we have been doing, and hopefully saw successes this legislative session at a state level, but continue to talk about this as really a national challenge as well. And how do we work together to get that funding and support that's needed to address the barriers for housing investment here in Otter Tail County. So we'll continue with these efforts and these actions and use it as guideposts to how we're spending our time and efforts and resources to support housing investment. So with that, we'll just jump right in, and I'll turn it over to Scott McMahon and let him introduce himself and share a little bit about the Greater Minnesota Partnership.
Great, thank you, Amy. It's great to be with you all today. I love getting out, whether in person or virtually, to our communities in Greater Minnesota. I have the chance to update you as to things that are happening in St. Paul. And following this session, there's a lot of good news to share. So, as Amy said, I'm Scott McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Minnesota Partnership. We are an advocacy organization focused on advocating for state investments and public policies that will help stimulate economic development across Greater Minnesota. So we spend a lot of time on housing. We spend a lot of time on childcare. We spend a lot of time on broadband and workforce. A lot of the things that our employers say, all too often are the challenges or the barriers that are holding them back from growing or expanding in our communities. So there's a lot to talk about in this session. Obviously, today I'm focusing on housing, but if folks have questions about the other things, feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to talk about those things. As we look at the work that we do, I'm going to tailor my comments today around really our focus, but I do want to highlight that there was over $1 billion of investment from the state into housing. And so this is what we're going to present today is a part of it. But there are a lot of other buckets and funds out there that cover the full spectrum of housing. From the Greater Minnesota Partnership standpoint, we really focus in on what are the areas that are Greater Minnesota specific challenges. Uh, and things that are really serving as that barrier to the economic development and economic expansion in our communities. So you'll hear me talk a lot today about workforce housing and how we make sure that we have housing opportunities to support our employers who are trying to recruit new employees in our communities to fill the jobs and so on and so forth. Uh, the first program that I want to highlight is the Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Grant Program. This is a program that started about a decade ago. It's housed at the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. Uh, we were able to secure $39 million in new money for the next 2 years of this program. To give you a sense as to how this compares to past years, we've had about $4 million a biennium for the past 4 or 5 biennium. And so this is a significant new investment into this program. It really is a sign that there's a recognition at the legislature and at the state agency that the housing needs in Greater Minnesota are different than the housing needs that we see in the metropolitan area. Um, so what these dollars will do is they will provide financing for the construction of new market rate multifamily rental properties. We know across Greater Minnesota that that is the most challenging housing segment to try and build. Uh, at the same time, it's one of the most in demand, if not the most in demand, housing option that we need. The challenge that we face in Greater Minnesota, whether it's multifamily or single family, is that the cost to produce a unit of housing is often more than the rents or the capital financing will support in our communities. And so what this program will do will provide grants of up to 25% of the project cost to help buy down uh, that that end cost to produce the unit of housing to try and bring more housing into our pipeline. Um, this program is run out of the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. They do annual RFPs for these dollars, and so we will see probably this fall will be the next RFP for this. And so it's a competitive grant program. Uh, Communities across the state will apply for these dollars. MHFA will score the applications to determine which ones elevate up to the point of being funded. But the reality is with $39 million over the next 2 years versus $4 million that we've seen in this program in the past, there will be much greater opportunity to get these dollars out into more communities across greater Minnesota and get these projects up and going. Again, they are market rate multifamily housing, so they're not income restricted. They're going to deal with what your market is saying out there. But again, it is for that multifamily rental side of the production area. So with that, Amy, I'll kick it back over to you to talk a little bit
Sure.
about how these dollars have been used in your communities.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So this program, has been around for a while, as Scott mentioned, and we've had a couple of communities that have been able to access these funds previously. So noted on here, Perham and Pelican Rapids both received funding to help, make projects move forward in their communities. And so they've been shown and demonstrated to produce housing and help produce housing here. It does require a developer partner, and that developer needs to be identified during that application window. So as Scott said, hopefully this fall, there will be another funding round. And so be thinking about where in your communities there might be, maybe there's been discussion about a project and it just didn't pencil out financially, and this might be enough to put it over the tipping point, where there's already that developer engaged, project kind of ready to go, except for the financing and the just that it doesn't work from a financial perspective because of those construction costs and the rents that we're able to achieve through the project. We're specifically looking at a small infill lot in Battle Lake that we, as the Community Development Agency, are close to. We have a purchase agreement on, so hopefully closing soon. And so we are looking for a partner for a small infill lot. That 8 to 12 unit building. Battle Lake has seen quite a bit of housing growth in the last couple of years, but they haven't seen that workforce housing niche come. There's been senior housing, there's some new single family ownership opportunities, but there hasn't been that workforce. And with various employers in town, they know they have that need. And so we are looking for a development partner for that particular opportunity. And so if you are someone who's maybe interested or knows someone who might be a good partner, we're readying the site. We'll take care of some, the demolition expenses and get it really project ready. The infrastructure is there. Like I said, it's an infill lot right off the main highway going through town. So thinking about those communities or opportunities in your communities, and again, we can help navigate, that making sure that timeline from the application is being monitored, and we're sharing that information out to you guys. So just one of the programs, and with the additional funding, hopefully won't be quite as competitive, but we know there's a lot of pent up demand for these resources, but certainly will be looking forward to additional funding versus what had been available in the past.
So this new Greater Minnesota Housing Public Infrastructure Program is a new one this session. We've actually been advocating for this for a few years now. What this will allow communities to do. So again, this is through Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, but this will provide grants to local communities, cities or counties, to cover up to 50% of the public infrastructure costs needed for new housing development. So you can think about it as, your streets, your sewers, your utilities, anything that is outside of that housing structure that needs to be in place to make a housing development work. This is funded at $8 million. There are some parameters around it. Grants can be up to 50% of the capital cost. For a single family lot, which would be any development up through a quadplex, the grants are a maximum amount of $30,000. So it's assuming a $60,000 total cost for the public infrastructure for that given lot. On anything bigger than the quadplex, it's $180,000 for the larger multifamily situation. So it's a Wednesday at noon. I just got back from vacation, so $180,000 doubled is going to be what, $360 for the overall cost on that one. So you can kind of see what the power is going to be on those dollars. This is new. We have been receiving a lot of interest for these dollars. I work closely with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and we have, I'm almost getting daily phone calls from city leaders across Greater Minnesota wanting to learn more about this program, wanting to learn more about what we can do with this. The great thing about this program is it's 100% flexible and it can be tailored into the needs of the community. So if your need is building out new single family lots, these dollars can support it. If your need is to build out more multifamily, if your need is to build out more senior living, these dollars are available to help cover that public infrastructure build out. Now, what's interesting is I had always kind of thought about these dollars as supporting new infrastructure opportunities. So if you're annexing land and looking at doing a new subdivision or something out there to kind of build out that infrastructure, I've had a conversation with at least one city that is looking at converting a former school building into a residential complex. And they're trying to figure out how to piece together lots of different buckets of money to make this thing work. And I realized that they probably are going to have to upgrade the public utilities around that facility in order to bring in, 30 new housing units into that building. So it does have the ability to be used for redevelopment as well, as long as you're dealing with that that public infrastructure side for housing. I am not sure right now when MHFA will get this program lifted up. In the omnibus bill this year, they had 16 new programs created that they're now administering. So this is one of them. And so it'll probably be later on this fall or early winter before they're up and ready to start looking at it, getting these dollars out the door. But they don't need to spend all these dollars in the next 2 years. They have some flexibility in there to be able to work with it, kind of see where things go. We will be advocating this session with it being a bonding year to put more money into this program. We've had some warm receptions from the housing chairs to do it. Now they're not the ones in charge of the bonding bill. But our hope is that we can kind of prove a concept of these dollars in the next 12 to 24 months and keep putting more money in there to make these projects available going out there. So that's kind of the quick summation of this one. There's still more to come as we learn more about how MHFA is going to handle this program moving forward.
Yeah, we're anxiously awaiting that timeline. We've got a couple of projects we think are really ready to be queued up and could be really ready for this program to help them get off the ground and be successful at the county. Did want to mention that they are going to be, I'm sure, highly competitive, and hopefully we can get more money into this. This is something I've been talking about. It's the biggest barrier I hear from our communities in getting additional housing growth is that infrastructure cost and how does it get managed. And in hearing that, we have established the program locally with our pool of one-time dollars for public infrastructure match. And so, just again, keeping this in mind that we can hopefully help make even maybe a more competitive application if we're putting in local dollars to help match those state resources and really bring in this case, limited resources to support that long-standing infrastructure investment. So when we make these investments in that infrastructure, they're for a long time. They're not, short-term investments. And so if we can get those going in our communities and get more tax base, get more housing, we'll all be in a better position, hopefully. So again, we want to be a partner in getting these resources here to help make projects move forward in Otter Tail County. So we're anxiously awaiting this one from a timeline perspective.
So the next program to highlight is the Challenge Grant Program. Now, looking back at the first two programs we highlighted, those are the only two programs that MHFA has that will support market rate housing construction in Greater Minnesota, or frankly, anywhere in Minnesota. With that said, there are other programs, the Challenge Grant being included, that we really need to highlight because they are powerful dollars in our communities. So the Challenge Grant was funded this year at $121 million. It's $95 million in additional funding. So that gives you a sense as to the magnitude of new capital available here. Although Challenge Grant is only for income restricted development, it is the most flexible program that MHFA manages. It can be used for the construction or the rehabilitation of existing properties. It can be used for single family or multifamily developments. It really is kind of the piecemeal bucket that MHFA uses to be really flexible and to help communities figure out how to go forward. So if you are looking at housing developments that are going to have some affordable housing units involved in the development, the Challenge Grant will be probably the best program to go after from that standpoint. I do want to highlight just the fact that the state invests over $1 billion into housing this session, and there are buckets out there for every type of housing development that you're looking at doing, whether it is to support housing opportunities to address homeless issues, whether it's to deal with affordable housing, workforce housing, kind of the whole spectrum of it. So while we have highlighted three specific programs that are the most impactful ones to target Greater Minnesota's unique issues, there are buckets out there that will be able to address pretty much whatever challenge or housing development that you are looking at in your communities. So I don't want you to think that these are the only three things that are out there. There's lots of other programs that are available.
Yeah, that's a good point, Scott. And this is um, there is a whole spectrum of need in our county, as well as now a whole new or additional capacity and to financially support those needs across that housing continuum. So we're excited to think about how we can solve those issues with some of these new resources. With some of the other Minnesota housing funding that now has been elevated as well. Just wanted to highlight a couple of projects that we have tapped into or hope to tap into some of that Minnesota housing funding. This past year or so, we, from our Housing and Redevelopment Authority's side, delved into new construction, which was new for us. And in Battle Lake, we're able to receive Minnesota housing resources that allowed for construction financing. So to build three new single family homes, as well as that value gap that we know is out there, that again, that cost of how much the home is to build versus how much it will appraise for. And there's that differential that we see in particularly our smaller communities where there hasn't been a lot of new construction to kind of prove that market from an appraisal standpoint. So we're on our third home, which is already sold in Battle Lake. And then we just last few weeks submitted another application to Minnesota Housing to support some additional single family entry level homes in Pelican Rapids. So we're looking forward to hearing about our funding application and then to see how these increased dollars are rolled out from Minnesota Housing and again, how we can tap into them. So thanks, Scott, for those. And now I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk about some additional programs coming out from Minnesota Housing and how they'll relate here in Otter Tail County.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking about 3 or 4 specific programs, and then we'll conclude with some information on home ownership programs. So first of all, this program, the State Housing Tax Credit Program and Contribution Fund, that's the official title, was adopted 2 years ago, but Minnesota Housing has just wrapped up the preparation of the program guidelines, and the comment time frame ended on August 11th. So we do expect this to be available yet this fall. But as they describe it, this is a new way to help finance multiple family and single family housing. Any taxpayer, whether a business or an individual, can contribute to affordable owner-occupied and rental housing developments and deduct 85 cents for every dollar contributed against their state tax liability. In addition, the law also provides the ability to designate one's contribution to a specific development. And this policy approach is fairly well tested in the country. Actually, many states have a similar a program, and this one is loosely based on the one in North Dakota. Why is this such an important new tool? Well, first, it's pretty simple and straightforward for individuals, households, or businesses to contribute. But second, it broadens the pool of housing funding and can motivate broad participation, especially for a community that wants to get behind a workforce development or an affordable housing development. So there's 2 parts to this program: the contributors, taxpayers that are contributing, and then the projects themselves or the recipients. So here's a high level summary. I advise you to consult your tax preparer and CPA. I am not a CPA, but this is what we know so far. So first, a taxpayer is one that is defined in state law, and one can make a contribution, but a minimum amount of $1,000 must be made, or a maximum of up to $2 million every year. And this program is only going to be available for a fairly short time, and will, unless it's reinstated by the legislature, but it will continue to the 31st of 2028. And so the state is recognizing that almost 10 million in tax credits will be available for the next 5 to 6 years. So once a contribution is made, the Department of Revenue will issue a tax credit certificate to the taxpayer, and then you can only use that credit against the state income taxes. Next slide, Sarah. I wonder if I'm frozen. Okay, projects. There's two pools that the contributions will be going toward. First, there's a general pool, and the projects that are funded by those contributions will have to go through an RFP process conducted by Minnesota Housing. And their program does establish some, quote, set-asides. Those are priorities that funding will be awarded to for projects for single-family housing, or projects that are located in small towns with a population lower than 2,500, and then for projects that serve households at 50% AMI. Then the designated pool is where contributors can say, I want to contribute to Development X located in Otter Tail County. Well, Minnesota Housing and the Department of Revenue will take in those contributions and set them aside until that specific development has been closed and is prepared for construction. So eligible uses of this fund can be for new construction, rehab, demolition, or financing costs. And so you can start as early as this fall to make contributions.
Okay, Barbara, can I add one other piece on that last program that as
Sure.
you were speaking, and something that we have talked about before? We know employers are a big part of driving this conversation around, workforce housing needs, and, thinking about this, it to that point about the designated contributions, if there is an employer who would qualify as a taxpayer, in that, again, we are not tax professionals, seek your professional support on that. But if that would, for an employer to participate in a housing project in their own communities, that's that idea that designated contribution would be for a project in your community that would, hopefully support the workforce housing needs or housing needs in that community where the employer is located. So this is really a new tool for employers to have that participation. Sometimes that's it's challenging on how to figure out how that contribution or participation might work for an employer to support housing, but this is a way that could work. So, and to be part of the financing and then also obtain that tax credit. So just wanted to highlight that as just to get people's minds thinking possibly.
Thank you, Amy. Very good. Okay, so here's the other programs that I will go through here. First of all is similar to the state assisting communities and counties with state aid for highways. This concept was put together this year for a statewide affordable housing aid. So the purpose in the legislation itself is to provide an annual contribution to counties and cities over 10,000 in population to assist them create and preserve housing within their jurisdictions to keep families from losing housing and to help those experiencing homelessness find housing. So the aid calculation is based on a ratio of cost burden households in each jurisdiction. So cost burden, as a lot of you know, it means that folks are paying more than 30% of their income toward their housing and utility costs. So the cost down to a reasonable amount. What we do know, the Department of Revenue has a web page up already about this program. And so, for example, Otter Tail County at the end of this year will receive approximately $143,000 through this program. There is about 5,800 households that are cost burden in the county. And then that same amount will be provided to the county next year as well. So the same eligible uses for these funds as I talked about in the previous program, and it has the same income limits for homeowner and rental developments. However, the law does suggest that counties prioritize lower income households, so 50% AMI households, which in the county is about 44,000 for a family of four, and then for home ownership at 80% AMI. The third program I want to talk about is the Local Housing Trust Fund Match. As some of you know, Otter Tail County established a housing trust fund 2 years ago, and now Minnesota Housing is tasked with devising a process and program to provide matching funds based on an application from a jurisdiction. So the Local Housing Trust Fund that the county operates is a fund that is a dedicated source of revenue for housing developments only. And it's also empowered by state law that the county can accept a private donation to contribute to the trust fund, and again, an employer a contribution for example, as well as state or other federal funding that would be eligible to be put in this type of fund. So then the state match could be up to a maximum of 300,000 according to statute. So I believe that this one may be available for applications by the end of this year. And then finally, there was a significant amount of money allocated by the legislature toward a variety of home ownership and down payment programs. We're still trying to sort through all of the initiatives that were adopted. Right now, Otter Tail County HRA partners with Minnesota Housing on a first-time home buyer program that lenders in the county operate and are able to provide lower cost financing for first-time home buyers. And we also have a county funded down payment program as well, which is up to 10,000 and can be used for buying a new home or the construction of a new home. And Tanya on our staff is responsible for administering that. And
All right.
back to you, Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So we wanted to highlight those, particularly the new local housing aid and that trust fund match, to really just highlight that there's just some additional flexible dollars coming into the county, hopefully with the trust fund match, and we know we'll be coming in with that local housing aid, and that gives us flexibility to again uh, take opportunities that are where our communities have them, where we see them, where we can really make a difference and be timely and not be as bound to some of the application windows and once a year opportunities to tap into some of the state financing. So we're really excited to see what those matches will do to help leverage local opportunities as well. We've mentioned a couple of our programs, down payment assistance. I mentioned the public infrastructure matching grant that we have, and as well as our existing rehab dollars, we have funds for multifamily rehab and conversion of space into housing, and a number of other programs. So just always a reminder that we have funds available to put into housing investment, and to just always reach out to us to think about how the programs either locally or at the state level can help meet the needs of a project or opportunity. And we will be wanted to share a save the date for another housing summit. We've had a couple of these over the last number of years. And so November 16th, again, we'll be gathering at Thumper Pond Resort in Otter Tail to have more of an all-day event to talk about financing opportunities, these programs, dig in a little deeper with some breakout sessions on how do they actually apply into a project, how do you get a project from idea to construction. Certainly highlighting some successes on the big build that we've had, and that we want to learn from others and hopefully have be able to replicate some of these successes on the state of rural housing. Kelly's with the Center for Rural Policy and Development, and they're doing a lot of great research around housing. They do a lot of the topics that we talk about, childcare, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to have Kelly join us to share some insights. He's joined us in the past and had we've got some great feedback on the session. I mentioned the breakout sessions. We'll be, looking at where, how we can make this really practical and and walk through applications and a process and what it takes to get from start to finish, and dig a little deeper into some of those areas. Always provide a great lunch on this event, but you can scan that QR code. And we'll be sending out these slides after as well. So should have mentioned that probably on the front end, but we will get those slides out. So go ahead and get registered. We hope to see lots of folks there, and get it on your calendar so you're free on that day in November. Again, November 16th at Thumper Pond. That really concludes our comments, but we will absolutely take questions. Here's contacts, emails for all of us, and feel free to reach out with questions after, but we can sure open it up for questions now. We're not necessarily experts on all these programs, but we do, we can help you get the answers if we don't know the answer, or get you connected with the right person if it's at another agency, or just get more information out there. So I'll stop there, and feel free to drop a question in the chat. Yes, we will send the slides out after. Thanks for that question. So feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Okay. You sure there's no questions? Clara, did I see you like literally raise your hand there? Oh, put it in the chat. Okay. What's the study being done? not sure. We are working on housing navigation review. Is that maybe the study you're referencing?
I
So we
got a
can chat
call
offline
from
too.
Amy, yeah, I got a call from Amy Johnson about
Sure.
a homelessness study. I was just curious if there was more
Oh.
info about that.
Sure, it's not necessarily a homelessness study. It's around housing navigation, which would include the whole spectrum of housing navigation. Yep. So yeah, as we get those results, that will certainly be incorporated into our work as well. Yep. Clara?
I was just thumbs upping. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All
And
right.
Amy, just to jump in here
Yeah,
real
Scott.
quick, obviously, questions that may come up following the meeting.
Mhm.
Minnesota Housing Finance Agency wants to hear from people. They want to know what questions folks have. So if there are things about specific programs, or you're looking at a project and you're not quite sure what financing may be available out there, reach out to MHFA. They've got a great team there that can help you kind of figure out, what might be your next steps to get something off the ground.
Yep. They're a great big team. All right. Well, not seeing any other hands go up or notes in the chat. Again, appreciate everyone joining us today. And as always, reach out with questions or comments or opportunities, and we'll be here to help as best we can. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.